And then this stuff archives. Hi.
Yeah, it does. Hey, guys. We're here at Paloma Media Studios with Michael Moynihan.
Hi.
Why are we here, Michael?
Well, because I'm recording with the fifth column in 20 minutes.
That's right, and I Shanghaied him. For,
we
a few
Shanghai,
minutes.
but the context of the Shanghai, can you use Shanghai in that context? Is this I came in yesterday when we recorded a version of the fifth column on Patreon, and there was something up on your screen about how to blow up a pipeline, which I know is one of your favorite activities.
Right.
You've blown up a few. I don't want to tell which
could
one.
we not? Let's not be specific. Yep.
You're the Weather Underground 2.0. Yep. So nobody had pointed out that the guy who is on this podcast, in a little context, is a guy who's written a book on how to blow up pipelines. Well, why somebody should blow up pipelines?
Well, he was a book called How to Blow Up a Pipeline, right? And I missed. I'll change the name of this recording later. But anyway, and I would listen to. As we talked about before, listen to David Remnick interview him for the New Yorker Radio Hour. And I was under the impression listening to it that Remnick had taken like 17 Dramamine before he interviewed him because the questions were just not even questions.
No, it was an embarrassment on a number of levels. But the thing that drew my attention to it, I don't have any specialty in pipeline destruction.
Yeah.
I do have somewhat of expert knowledge in the person who was interviewing, which is a guy named Andreas Malm, who is a Swedish journalist that I knew back from my days in Sweden, and who could be spotted speaking at Hezbollah rallies. Literally in Stockholm.
And what years is this?
It's probably 2000. So it was during the war, so that had been 2005, 2006, around that time. And he wrote a piece for Express on the newspaper called "Here's Why We Should Support Hezbollah." So as I pointed out to somebody who had tweeted about this on a couple of days ago, I said, it's not surprising that the guy calling for violence is the guy who wrote this editorial. And the funny thing about it is I just listened to the segment podcast today.
Right.
And he hasn't mellowed with age at all, but like in American university, he's been hired by Lund University as a professor. And he is a psychopath. I mean, he is notorious in Sweden, in a place where kind of lefty psychos dominate the media landscape. He's known. And I was looking something up today, trying to say, this thing I remember about Malm, and it came up in a book that I had by a Swedish journalist. It's only in Swedish, called Extremists, and it's about
he's profiled. He's
mentioned in it. Yeah, it's about left-wing extremists and right-wing extremists, like neo-Nazi extremists, and the kind of Antifa types or the Black Bloc types in Sweden, which were pretty big back in the day. And it's for a number of reasons. And people on the left have attacked him pretty ruthlessly in Sweden, particularly a guy named Rasmus Fleischer. But I said, what is he like now? Maybe he's mellowed. Let's give the guy a little bit of credit. Maybe he's mellowed. And so, of course, I just 2 seconds of Googling, which apparently David Remnick was not capable of. He only recently was on this kind of lefty Zoom call, in which one of the professors, was a professor on it, said, "I'm leaving. This guy is nuts." And he walks out. He's a German leftist who is an anti-capitalist guy, leaves. And Andreas Mom, through this, says something about the heroic head of the Al-Qassam brigades of Hamas, which rain rockets on Israel. He calls these guys heroic, and the heroic mujahideen. And this is the guy that David Remnick is talking to. A little bit of cursory Googling, you would have realized that the man who said we cannot talk to Steve Bannon at the New Yorker Festival because we're platforming a bad person is platforming, quote unquote, which is not a word I use, somebody who is a violent nutcase.
Well, we both agreed yesterday before I listened to the interview, I was like, well, sure. Like, let's talk to people. I mean, I might think the idea, besides being legal, I might think it is just a fucking terrible idea. If you think you're going to do better things because you're like super, he's saying, it's interesting. Mom is saying, well, the reason he's doing this is because of climate change. I think the guy's basically a fucking nutball, and he's just like going to land on whatever it is that, that's going to give him the opportunity to blow things up. Right. But all right, so you're going to say, this is my method. Okay. So Remnick thinks, I don't know, we're going to give this guy some space. This is not an idea. Blowing up a pipeline is not an idea worth exploring.
Well, as an interviewer, Like, I understand when you're doing something with a tape recorder for yourself that you're going to later package into a piece. Those approaches of interviews are different. But if you're doing it on a podcast and recording this, I mean, David Remnick makes a fool of himself.
He does.
And I've said this, we talked about this the other night. I do believe that David Remnick is a great journalist. He wrote Lenin's Tomb, which I think is one of the best books on the end of the Soviet Union. The problem with this podcast is there's a million opportunities to get in and challenge some of these totally bizarro ideas, and he doesn't do it.
No, even in like the simplest way. So when he says to Malm, he says, well, what do you think? Okay, well, we're going to use, what is it? The not sophisticated,
targeted.
Right. Yeah. Whatever. It's,
like
we're going to do it. We're going to, and then like, I would think like one of the first things you would say is like, well, when you blow things up, people might get killed. Okay, he skates right by that. Remnick, this is not of interest to him. But he says, well, why are you doing it? Why is this your method? Like, why not use like peaceful stuff? And he's like, well, because it hasn't worked. Well, can you give some examples of where violent extremism worked? Well, it worked, it worked in the US this summer with all the stuff that we saw, the violence and the vandalism. It worked this summer. If I were the interviewer, I would say, okay, can you give me a few examples?
He does. But he doesn't tell him. But no, Mom gives an example, and this is an interesting one for people to chew on a little bit. He says, at the beginning of this protest, there was violence and he says the good people of Minneapolis, and I suppose the good people are the ones that are always dispensing the violence. If you're Andreas Mom, the good people of Minneapolis attacked the police station, burned things down, and then the movement took off, as if that this is mistaking causation here, as if that was the catalyzing moment of a movement that wouldn't have existed without the burning and the looting, which is wrong.
Well, it's a self-catalyzing movement, right? It's like they're just getting the energy from the destruction. But you still, as I said yesterday, it's like, okay, Andreas Mom, you want to be the smart guy in the room. You want to be the guy that creates change. But Michael, it really would take a little too much time, right, to go get an environmental engineering degree and then say, we're going to figure out some better ways. That just takes too much time and maturity. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make a little splash instead.
Well, the splashes, how do you get on the New Yorker's podcast produced in conjunction with WNYC when you're a slobbering lunatic professor in Sweden who is known in Sweden to be a slobbering lunatic now professor who's notoriously written in defense of various terrorist groups? Well, you write in English something as provocative as how to blow up a pipeline. But the thing is, you don't expect a editor of this august publication like the New Yorker to roll over for you.
Did you?
Which is what was really depressing.
Was it you or Matt who said last night that they actually, like the people inside, let's say, these bubbles within a bubbles, like the New Yorker, right? They who are they listening to? It's the Ibram X. Kendis and whatever's happening with DEI. And so they really, 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 really believe that the revolution
I was talking
is at the doorstep. So, we better be on the right side here. So we better invite like all these little voices into the room to show that we're on, the right side.
There's a great Simpsons episode in which Homer's in space and there's an ant farm that blows up, and the camera just shows all these ants, and Kent Brockman, the newsman, says, "Oh my God, this are our new ant overlords," and he starts saying how much he loves them and how much he expresses his fealty to the new ant overlords, and then after the apologizes later, he's like, "I was just a little, premature," and that is some version of this.
Yeah, no, it is. But I also found he was somnolent. Is that word?
Somnolent? Soporific?
He really, and it's funny because that interview kind of like ended at the 21-minute mark. It's like, okay, well, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
It was just like, what was this about? Why were you giving, again, I'm happy to hear people's ideas. Why did we hear this guy's ideas?
Well, one of the things that is interesting, as long as you're on the right side of an issue, vaccines are very similar to this. As somebody who's double vaccinated, very pro-vaccine, thinks everybody should get vaccinated. If you're on that side, right, on the pro-vaccine side, which isn't really a side, but people have made it a side, anything you say, no matter how ridiculous, doesn't fall into the category of misinformation or stupidity because you're on the right side. This is the same thing that's going on here. So if you noticed in that interview, every bad thing that happened, every weather event in the past 100 years is attributable to global warming. I don't know if this stuff is or is not. I'm not a climate scientist. I don't follow this stuff closely. I know that people I trust say that this is a bad thing and it's happening and something has to be done about it. But guy is also not a climate scientist. In every bad, he's like, the world's literally on fire.
It's
you can
on fire.
see it. all over the world, these wildfires here and there. And is it as if there were never any wildfires prior
or
to
hurricanes.
this happening, or hurricanes?
Right, like,
I don't know if that frequency is increasing. People say that it is. I haven't looked at it, but that is just that you have to come to a pretty crazy premise to allow for violence to be the response, right? So if you're saying, you have to establish, if everything's kind of, somewhere in the middle, it's bad, it's going to get worse, but we can actually mitigate it. No one is going to say violence is okay. But when you establish that America is the most racist society in the world, you can have BLM violent movement, right? Or have some violent elements to it. You can blow up pipelines, because what is the option is, and he says, of course, believing his own hot air on this that is contributing to global warming. He says that it is actually you're morally culpable if you don't, which is one of those great totalitarian ways of thinking.
Sure. So, okay. So you blow up the pipeline. What have you accomplished? Like, isn't that then when the actual work begins? And are you the person and the people following you? Are you prepared to do that work if you succeed at that? And do they think?
No, he's a journalist. He's an academic. I mean, these people don't live in the real world. And he also lives in fucking Sweden. There's not a place where people are, really dealing with how this will affect the poor in America. It's a very good pose to get on the New Yorker podcast and write editorials about and get people mad and make people know the name Andreas Mom. I knew his name in the 2000s in Sweden because he was a fucking nutcase.
Yeah.
And he was notorious. He was notorious that he would say these totally bananas things. And as I mentioned, this podcast I saw him on, and it was in English, where he refused to say the word Israel. He only referred to it as the Zionist entity, which is essentially, shockingly for a man who expresses fealty to Hamas.
And yet the New Yorker is like, it's all cool. We're all good with this.
Yeah, I mean, when and David Rump is Jewish. When someone asked the question, and I think he does that mealy mouth thing where he cites other critics rather than himself being the critic. Here's what Ezra Klein said. Here's what somebody else said, which is not what you're supposed to do. But when doing that, he says, how is this going to affect the poor? And he's like, well, it's always going to have an effect on the poor if like oil prices go up or something. And that's when I turned it off. Actually, I was like, what? It's always going to have an effect on the poor is not actually an answer to what happens to the poor. This is the world we live in. We don't live in the fantasy world that you wish existed. I'm dealing with the one that does actually exist. So what do you do then, sir? Nothing.
No, because that's not his business. His business is to be this sort of shiny figurehead that people can pretend is some sort of solution, right? Yeah. And I also like the idea that you can build bombs to blow up pipelines and not actually either accidentally or on purpose kill people, or the people that you attract to your movement that kind of like to build bombs aren't going to maybe we'll make a little bigger spectacle here. So what happens when they start killing people? I think we talked about this last night. But
it's a very good point. You can't screen out the real nuts, because when you attract people that say we're going to build bombs, we're actually sabotage things, you're not going to get the sort of normal,
all PhD people that are coming in. And then what you have to do is your movement, which he's already doing, you have to keep bending it to say, well, that killing was justifiable. And then that next one. And then that next one, because we're saving the world. That's what I covered in Portland. It's like all of these things that we burn and all of these that throw our buckets of feces. It's all justifiable because we're building a better world. Okay, show me.
Well, look, that's always the justification for everything. I mean, the Nazis believed they were building a better world. The Soviets believed they were building a better world. Everybody has a noble goal. It doesn't mean that the means, the ends, or actually the ideology that supports it is not something that's completely crackpot. I mean, that is the laziest fucking thing in the world, is to say, I have this idea of a better world, and this is how I'm going to do it. But the thing that worries me most about this, and I don't know if this is actually going to pan out, I really hope it doesn't, but I suspect that people who would be ignored in the past, like somebody like Andreas Mom, I think we're going to have to deal with them a lot more in the broader public media, not in the sense, and I think this is actually true on both sides, not in the sense that these are people that have existed in the academy, being nutcases in the academy. I mean, you send your kids off to school, you have no idea in the 4 years.
How many weathermen are teaching?
Yeah, exactly. There's people saying, it wasn't that bad, the bombing things. But now it is intruding upon the mainstream increasingly, because, once respectable and vaunted journalists like David Remnick are now allowing these people on their airwaves and actually not challenging me. And you know what? I have to say this, just to clarify. want him to be on the airways.
So do I.
I think that's great.
I've invited.
They've published the book.
I have an open invitation now. If Andreas, Mom, you want to come and hang out with us and talk, I will ask these questions and I will be respectful about it.
Yeah.
Because we didn't get that yesterday, and I frankly,
can we put a green screen up of like the Temple Mount and pretend that we're doing it from the Zionist entity?
Yes,
and see if he stays on.
Absolutely. I also just think it is. I thought it was kind of lazy on Remnick's part in terms of the energy put into it, and I also think some of it was inspired not just by curiosity but by fear of not getting enough people like this in the room.
Yeah, I mean, and for somebody who very publicly disinvited Steve Bannon,
right.
and we have to get to a point, by the way, that we don't do the throat clearing about whether or not we agree with Steve Bannon. It's just a person who's influential in American politics, and that's it. And to know that person influential in American politics has odious ideas, you must talk to them, right?
First of all, people can go up and look up Michael Moynihan, who has spent a lot of time with Steve Bannon. And I got to tell you, had Remnick, this is like how many years ago, 3 years ago that he would have had Bannon on? 4?
Yeah, about 3 years
something like
ago.
that.
Yeah.
I would have gone.
Yeah.
I would have gone and seen that because it would have been interesting. I mean, we should be interesting in ideas.
Look, I got shit for it too. And I got shit for, a guy who was Donald Trump's campaign manager in the last stretches of the 2016 campaign. I got him in the last stretches of the 2020 campaign. And the first question I asked him is where were you at this time 4 years ago? And he said, I was in a hotel room with Donald Trump in Las Vegas, and explains the whole scene to me. And the people who couldn't understand the utility of sitting with the man who was Donald Trump's campaign manager at this time in the previous election are sociopaths. And they are people that want to excise views that are bad and views that they don't agree with from the entire public conversation. And I think we'll talk about this in the fifth column tonight about YouTube's crackdown on, anti-vax stuff and all sorts of other things. Alexei Navalny, taking stuff offline in Russia because it's illegal in Russia. So, yeah, I mean, we're in a situation now that arguing about free speech is disconnected from the government, which I think it probably should be at this point, because it's not always about that first minute. It's about the general kind of atmosphere of free speech. And the problem with the atmosphere of free speech now is that the other side is winning. And the other side are people who say words, ideas are harmful. They're harmful to communities of blank, fill it in. They're harmed and they're weakened by these things. Unbelievable how fragile.
But blowing up a pipeline is okay.
It's not bad at all.
Right. Okay. Guys, thanks for spending some time with us. Mike,
I got to go record.
He's got a real recording to do. Anyway, I'm sorry we didn't get to your questions. I'll look at them later, maybe answer. And thanks for hanging out with us. Okay. Bye.
And then that gets archived.